All right, so let's get started. I want to introduce you first to my 5th period class. This is a mixture of students. So we have some students in here that are learning kind of just the introduction, the basics of teaching, but then we also have some students in here that are learning about human growth and development, actually. So some of the stuff that you work with as well. So, you know, just to give you an idea of kind of, you know, where they're at, if you would go ahead and introduce yourself and what you do, and talk a little bit about your career.
Okay. My name is Elizabeth Crosby. I am a board certified behavior analyst. So it's a BCBA. I'll just call myself a behavior analyst because it's shorter. I work in the field of applied behavior analysis, ABA, and currently I work primarily with children and adults who have autism or other developmental or intellectual disabilities. So in the field of ABA, we apply Skinner's science of human behavior to teach and change behaviors. So we work on acquisition goals such as communication and social skills. And then we also work on problem behaviors like aggression and tantrums and self-injury. That's what I do currently.
That's awesome. So looking back at your first, you know, when you first graduated high school, going into college, what was your progression from college to the degree that you have now, the degree you're working on now?
So when I entered my undergrad at college at Florida Southern, I was an education major and an English major, and I wanted to be an English teacher, just like you. But I didn't like the education program at Florida Southern, so I dropped my education major and I picked up psychology instead. I kept English because I just love English. So for my psychology major, I had to do an internship. And the internship I ended up at was an ABA clinic, so behavior analysis clinic here in Lakeland, Florida. And it wasn't a field I ever knew existed. I didn't know ABA was a thing. I'd never heard of it before. I'd only ever heard of BF Skinner, and maybe a little bit of ABA in like a human development or intro to psychology class. Um, so after that internship, I just fell in love with the field. It was amazing. And I learned that to progress in the field, to become what I am now, a behavior analyst, I required a master's degree. There's a board certification exam I had to sit for. And to qualify for that exam, I first had to get a master's degree. So I applied to FIT, the Florida Institute of Technology, for a master's specifically in ABA and got my field work. I required a certain amount of supervised field work hours, again, to qualify for that exam. Following graduation and my field work, I took my exam and I passed. And that's where I am now. I got my certification, so I'm working as a BCBA in my field.
That's awesome. So you said that you got a master's at Florida Institute of Technology, FIT,
Yes. Yep.
And that was at the Orlando campus.
Yes.
Okay, so when you got your master's, you got your certification, how did you like start working in that field?
So FIT partnered with a company called Quest, and it was really convenient because one of my professors was also the president of Quest. So we worked closely together. Like I mentioned, I had to have supervised field work. And so I got my field work at Quest. So I was able to be supervised by my professors, which really helped, I feel like, round out my education. But that led to, I was offered a job at Quest and I did stay there for a little while. But then I ultimately started looking at other companies. I kind of wanted to grow and see what other sort of clinics were out there, work with some different populations. So I bounced around a lot. I first worked in Tampa, and then I moved to Colorado and worked there. And then I moved to Hawaii and worked there. And now I'm back in Lakeland working here. So I've worked at quite a few clinics, and they're all a little different and they all have different things to offer. And I've learned a lot about kind of what I expect in a clinic.
Yeah.
Wait, I have a
Okay,
question.
Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead, Israel. Yeah.
What was your favorite clinic? Like, what was your favorite state that you did, like the clinic? Like, what was your favorite?
Oh, so that's a good question because the best clinic I worked at was definitely my first one at Quest. Um, they were the best organized clinic. I felt like they really put the clients first. But I had the most fun in Hawaii, like living there as a state, just because it was such an interesting, fascinating place. However, I had a really bad experience with the clinics there. So um, it's hard to answer your question. Like the best clinic was here in Orlando, but the most fun I had living in a different state was definitely Hawaii.
All right, thank you.
Mhm.
Kind of to follow up with that, your internship, oh, MRF asks in
Oh,
the
I
chat,
see that.
yeah, would you go back to working at Quest?
Go back to working at Quest. So I have thought about it. I think it would be fun. I am currently actually working on my PhD, and with that, I want to go into teaching, kind of come full circle and teach the master's level classes. So I think it would be fun to go and work at FIT and partner again with Quest. I don't think I would want to work at Quest doing what I do now purely from a financial standpoint. They're a nonprofit company, and as such, they don't pay as well, which I think means great things for the clinic itself. But financially, I don't think it's where I want to be. But I would love to partner with them again, and I've
Uh,
definitely referred people there.
yeah. Kind of following up with your internship with Quest, because some of my students were looking at apprenticeships and kind of the evolution of how this education system has evolved from just rote learning, like memory learning and traditional classroom, to actually applying that knowledge in a like work setting. How would you describe that experience? Was there a lot more learning involved in that? Like, how did that look to you, or how did that feel as a student going into the field?
So I think because my field, to get the exam, you require that supervised field work. Um, I had to do 750 hours of supervised field work. And I think because of that, it really equipped me to enter the field with my certification, like ready to work. But I think a lot of that is due to Quest, specifically in the education I got at Quest and FIT. Now, since I'm on the other side, I supervise people working on their field work. And I find that there are other schools and other programs that don't equip them as well.
Mm,
They get the technological side, they kind of have what they need to pass the test, but they don't have what they need to actually do the job, because those are much different sides.
yeah, I definitely agree. So then, over the course of your career, I know you said you worked in a bunch of different places. What made you want to go and get, you're working on your PhD. What made you want to go and get another degree after finishing your master's?
So, like I said, I would like to go into teaching. I'd like to work on teach the master's level. Part of that is because I'm seeing people come into the field that just they're not prepared, and unfortunately, that's to the detriment of the field. There's a lot of people who could pass the test. That doesn't mean they're good. And because we work with such a sensitive population, I work with kids with autism. I feel like you need to know more than just the technical aspect. Also, in my PhD and in my master's, I got introduced to the research side of it, which I feel like, at least when I was in my undergrad and I thought of education, or even psychology, I didn't really think about research. I thought maybe the extent of research was like lab rats or pigeons, Skinner boxes, but there's a lot more to it. So pursuing my PhD has opened me up to a lot of other avenues in research and growing this field and expanding it and seeing the applications outside of special ed. So I think getting my PhD has really opened a lot of doors in that respect, maybe not for like specific jobs, but to kind of expand the science in and of itself, and um like what I can do to apply and grow the field.
What are some of those areas that people are, exploring the research in?
So it's really exciting. This is the most exciting thing I think about the field. When you Google ABA, you're going to find autism clinics. That's what you're going to find. You're going to find behavioral clinics, which is great. And that is kind of the wheelhouse of what we do right now. But the research is expanding outside of that. We work with behavior analysis, and most of that is human behavior. But there's also animal behavior analysis. One of my professors at FIT actually works or worked. I'm not sure if she's still there currently. It was a few years ago now. But at Animal Kingdom, working with the trainers and the animals. So for example, she developed programs to teach the lions to turn their back on the trainers to be able to get shots when they needed their veterinary care. She also trained some of the big primates to hold out their arms for IVs or shots. And she worked with, I think it was a toucan that was supposed to be like part of a show, but was terrified of crowds. So she like developed this whole program to desensitize the toucan to the crowds, so it could be part of the show. So I know a lot of people think of animal training, at least I did. I thought about like the dolphin show at SeaWorld, but to think about the sort of animal training for the care and health of the animals is really interesting. And that's all behavior analysis. Personally, for my dissertation, for my program, I'm working on the application of behavior analysis to criminal justice. So I'm looking at false confessions and coerced confessions following arrests. I'm also part of a lab right now that's the Bias, Prejudice, and Racism Lab. And we're working on studies relating to those things, especially now. So I have another side project that I'm looking at for medical doctors and them being trained on how different symptoms present on different ethnicities. So, for example, illnesses that present with like different rashes, they may be missed on African American skin because it doesn't look the same or doesn't show up the same way. There's also behavior analysts doing research on environmentalism. I read a study at Disney actually where they brought in a behavior analyst to do a study on how far people were willing to carry their trash before they dropped it on the ground. And then that's how Disney decided how far apart to put their trash cans. They've done a lot of studies on like speeding and recycling. It's such a fascinating field because you can really apply it to anything. There's a subsect of ABA called OBM, Operational Business Management, and it's essentially like what I do for kids with autism, but for a business. So they go into a business and work on how do you train your team? How do you reinforce them? How do you reinforce employees to actually do the job? How do you apply punishment if needed? There's so many things you could do with this field. I think that's the most exciting thing about it.
Emirath asks, how different is it when you began the program and now? Is there more stress? And then there's another question there, do you enjoy it? I feel like there's a lot of questions in there, but yeah, how is it different from when you began to now? And then is there more stress? And then do you enjoy it?
So do you mean like my PhD program currently or like in my field in general when I started to now? Okay. So so what's different is that I think there's more growth. It is a pretty new field. So it originally like I said, the wheelhouse, the essence was like autism. It was behavioral modification, which is amazing and it's what I do. But now branching out and growing into these like other subsections is really fascinating. I do think as I grow in my position, there is more stress. I think there's more that I know there's more that I'm realizing now that I wasn't aware of before. For example, all my funding, all the company's funding comes from medical insurance. And I find that there's a big like financial push and issues. Our clinic is run as a company. It is a company, it's for profit. But it can be to the detriment of the clients, which causes more stress on me. It causes ethical dilemmas and it makes it really hard. I definitely do enjoy it. I will say I enjoy it 90% of the time. There is a 10% where it's just hard. I mean, with any job, there's hard days. Sometimes I get frustrated with myself, with my company, with my clients. So there's some days that if you were to ask me, I'd be like, nope, I hate it. I'm done. But overall, I really love my field. I could talk about ABA all day. So I think it's different between enjoying my field and enjoying my job. Those are definitely two different things.
Great question, Amarath.
Yeah.
And, you know, Israel mentioned or asked you kind of what your favorite place to work at was, but could you talk about the differences between the states that you worked in, how they operated, and what they asked of you as an
Yes.
ABA. Sorry, if you hear that, that's the bell.
Okay.
We have a bell system going on during fifth period. So it may ring again before our conversation is over. Just ignore it.
I'll ignore it. Okay.
Yeah.
So it was really fascinating. I'm glad I've had the opportunity to work in different states. I will say that Colorado and Florida are pretty similar in what was expected of me, as far as being a clinician. But Hawaii was completely different. In Hawaii, a law was passed recently in the last 5 years called Luke's Law, which states that any student who qualifies for ABA therapy is required to have a therapist allowed with them in the classroom. So I would have clients that were either in special ed classrooms or gen ed classrooms, and we would have therapy during the school day. We'd have a therapist that followed them the whole day and helped them with social skills, communication, all the same things we do in the clinic. That was so different from here because of Luke's Law, which the majority of states don't have. In Florida and in Colorado, we're not really allowed in the school system. We have to really fight for it. And even when we do fight for it, we're kind of allowed in for observations and assessment, but we're not allowed to provide services. With the exception of private schools, they'll let us in. But that's the biggest change between both states, is that Hawaii was just, there was such a big push for ABA. It was so much more inclusive and welcome, where we're still kind of fighting for that here.
Ashley asks, what made you choose the schools you did to pursue the career when you knew it was what you wanted to study?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
So for my master's, I only applied to 2 schools. I applied to USF and I applied to FIT. When I did my research, I really wanted to get into FIT because they had such a close partnership with that company, Quest, like I mentioned. And Quest had such a good reputation. It still does. And that close partnership, I felt, and I ended up being right, that it would really just broaden my education because my own professors would also be the ones with me at work. So I really was able to like apply what I was learning in school into my real job, and then get that immediate feedback, which is amazing. The difference at USF is that you have approved practicum sites, but the professors don't go. They may check in, but it's not the same. Whereas my primary supervisor was also my teacher. So that's how I choose that school. That's how I chose FIT. Right now, I attend the Chicago School of Professional Psychology for my PhD. And that one I chose because I wanted to do an online program. I didn't want to move for my PhD. As you guys can see, I've already moved a lot in the last few years, so I didn't want to move again just for school. But they also have a really good reputation, having very small cohorts. And when I did my interview, and I've since learned from attending there, that they do a good job of not making it feel like an online program. I have many of my classmates' phone numbers. We text a lot. I feel like we do an in-person residency, which was canceled this year because of COVID, but that allowed me to meet my fellow students and my professors in person. I formed a lot of bonds with my cohort, and the cohort's small, so I really like that program.
Israel asks, were you nervous for the first time? Was it difficult? Israel, can you be more specific about first time?
Like what? Like in the first time, I'm trying to say like for like the field, like to work with students with behavior. What was it? Yeah, different behavior structure.
Yeah, I was really nervous. Like when I started my internship, I had no idea what to expect. I had very minimal previous experience or even understanding of what autism was. So I didn't know what to expect. And I still kind of get nervous when I start new clients. I still get nervous. They're all my clients are so different. You really never know what to expect. And it was difficult. So when I first started my internship, it was easy because I just had to do what I was told. I didn't really understand why I was doing what I was doing. My supervisor was like, here's the curriculum, here's the program, this is how you do it. But as I got more interested and as I continued my education and learned more about it, it became a little harder. Now I'm in the position of writing the curriculum. But at the same time, it's easier because I do have the understanding, and I can kind of see why my supervisors didn't tell me the whys, because I have staff that they don't care. They just do what they're told, which is completely fine. Um, Whereas I love to talk about the why because I love my science. So the first time was really difficult. It can still be challenging. I kind of picture every new client as like the first time all over again. Um, and I have to just start from scratch.
I think it's a great time for you to talk about your experience with some of these clients, both the good and the bad. We've got some students in here who are also in the early childhood program. So some of them have worked with the baby bolts, is what we call them, or the little kids. And some of them, they haven't gotten really the chance this year to do that because of COVID. But can you talk about some of your really great experience, some of the stuff that was like really, really awesome for you, and then maybe some of the stuff that was not so awesome?
Not so awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll definitely start with the awesome stuff. And there's so much. Like I said, I work a lot on communication and behavior reduction. I think the first time I kind of had that like, wow, this science is amazing and what I'm doing matters, was when I hadn't started my master's yet, but I had started applying. And the clinic I worked at was in Brandon, and we had like a two-way mirror. So in the playroom, we just saw a mirror, but on the other side, parents could watch our sessions. And I was playing with one of my clients, and I was teaching him how to sign. And he was picking up sign language so fast, like he was communicating left and right, and he was just doing so well. And I didn't know his mom was on the other side of the window because we couldn't see. So at the end of the session, I walked out, I brought him out, and I was telling mom, and she was sitting there crying because she was like, I've never seen him communicate, and I've never seen him like laugh like that. Like when he's in school, it doesn't seem like anyone likes him because he has problem behavior, so he kind of gets pushed aside. So I think for her to see and to acknowledge like what a difference she was already seeing in him, and for me to really, like, for me it was just a session, like it was a good session, but it was like that's just how it was working with him. I think it was a big turning point for me to see like the difference that I could make in these kids' lives, and that the parents were seeing and how much it meant to them. So those moments are the amazing ones. That was my first one, so I'll never forget it. Um, on the flip side, that same kid was also my first serious injury. So I worked with him for over a year. So maybe like 4 or 5 months after that, we were stacking blocks. He was 2. He was a little guy. And we were stacking blocks, and he did not want to stack the blocks. He got very mad. He was very upset. And he bit me. He bit a literal chunk out of my arm. I'm wearing long sleeves, so you can't see it, but it's probably about the size of a quarter. I have a good, nice scar. And that's been about 7 years now. That scar's never going to go away. But he bit an entire piece of my body off. So that was really gross. That was my first like serious injury. Yeah, Israel, that's the phase I had. My boss saw it happen too, so that was really cool. She gave me praise for like making him finish stack the blocks, and then I was sent to the doctor. Um, I have had my fair share of injuries. I've gotten a concussion from a client. I had another client dislocate my kneecap. That's not to like terrify you for my field. I don't want any of you to leave and be like, I'm never doing that, because that sucks. I mean, those parts aren't great, but for one, I like the high intense clients. I feel like the progress we make with them is so clear and easy to see. And just decreasing that behavior opens up like the world for them. On the flip side, though, you don't have to work with those kids if any of you decide to pursue ABA. I have a lot of supervisors that they don't take high intensity cases. It's not their thing, which is completely okay. I like them. I think it's kind of fun. It's not fun to get hurt, but it's fun. Um, I will say that I've learned a lot from each of my like serious injuries. All of them were my fault. Even getting bit, I've since learned what we call not crossing the midline. So like if you drew a line right down your body, you don't cross it because that's the bite zone, which I crossed and I got bit. So now I know to sit behind my students or out of their reach. My concussion, I had a client, he was 21, significantly taller than me, and he liked to work for strips of paper. So I had a bag and I was holding it open. I was looking down into the bag and he was digging around. And something happened. I don't know what, because I wasn't looking, but something happened to make him mad. And he slammed his head down onto the back of my head, which resulted into a concussion. But that was my fault. I should have been watching his face and the environment and not the bag in his hands, because I would have seen what happened to trigger him and I could have avoided my own injury and his, because I'm sure he didn't feel great either. Although I think I felt worse. He didn't get a concussion.
So you mentioned that you have you had a 21-year-old client. What is your age range of groups of students that you work with?
My youngest client right now is 2, so I have another little, and my oldest client is again 21. And I have my caseload right now. I think I have 15. I should probably know that number. And they range. So I have like 4 or 5 of them are between 2 and 6 years old. The majority of them are kind of middle school age, and then I have 2 that are adults that are over 18. One's 20 and one's 21. So, which is really fun because even though it's all ABA, their programming is completely different. I mean, what I'm teaching my 5-year-olds, I'm not teaching the 21-year-old. They have different goals and different needs.
Can you give us an example of a technique or something that you might use with a client to, help them cope or help them change behavior? Some of my students, we learned about reinforcements and punishments,
Yes.
Skinner's framework. But if you could give us an example of what that actually looks like in a real situation, maybe that can kind of drive that home for them.
Yeah. So as you guys learned, since you learned Skinner's framework, reinforcement and punishment isn't what we every day think about. Like punishment isn't necessarily going in timeout. Punishment is just anything that decreases behavior, reinforcement increases. So those are our core principles and we use them every day. So for example, I'm teaching one of my little clients right now, he's 4. I'm teaching him how to sign because he can't talk, or at least he doesn't talk yet. He could talk. I'm teaching him how to sign. So we contrive the opportunities if there's something he wants. So if he wants his juice cup, I'll hold his cup up, and then his therapist will give him the sign for drink. And she'll hand it and prompt it. When she prompts it with her full hand and makes him make the sign for drink, we give him the juice, but we only give it to him for a couple seconds. Like he can take a sip and then we take it back. And we kind of fade that prompting out until he does it independently. So we call it differential reinforcement. So if he does it independently, he gets like a huge party. Like we cheer, you can have all the juice, you get tickles, you get praise. But if you need my help to do it, you only get a little bit. On the flip side, for managing behavior and coping with it, that's where we use the functions of behavior. I don't know if you've gone over that. I don't think it is Skinner, but it's not something not like
it's a little bit more advanced. We're sticking kind of just with the basics,
which makes sense. So the functions of behavior for a fun like ABA 101 quick one are attention, escape, and access to tangibles, and automatic. So you do it because it feels good. Which you guys can look around at yourselves, your parents, your friends, and you can categorize almost any behavior into those 4 things, which is kind of fun to do. So we use those. So for example, with punishment, if I have a client who is screaming because he wants his iPad, I'm not going to give him the iPad, because that would be, if I handed him the iPad, I would be reinforcing the screaming behavior, right? Because he's doing it to get the tangible, to get the iPad. By withholding it, I'm punishing it. So I'm punishing the screaming. Once the screaming stops, even for a split second, that's when we reinforce it. So if he's screaming, wants the iPad, and then he goes quiet, oh, thanks for a quiet voice, here's your iPad. That's like a whole bunch of ABA 101, like crammed into a little example. But that's how we use it. So we use the functions of behavior and kind of contrive those opportunities. And when I'm working on coping with behaviors, we always increase something when we decrease another thing. So if he's screaming for the iPad, not only am I not going to give it to him for screaming, but I'm going to teach him how to ask for the iPad so that he has the thing to reinforce, but also the thing that we're going to punish.
Great, that's great. Okay, so Ashley asks, what school truly motivated you to continue this career and not drop the degree you were working to earn? By motivate, I mean in regards to what opportunities did the school offer to encourage you to continue your work in the field?
Oh, that's a good question. So currently, my school motivates me. My PhD, the Chicago School motivates me by um, encouraging me to do research, and my professors really help me do the research in the field that I want, so I can stay interested. Um, I love what I do. I love my clients, but I'm not as interested in continuing with the realm of autism. So I'm motivated to kind of push the field and see how it can be applied and where it can go. Um, and for continuing my career, I think not so much school specifically, but my professors in and of themselves and my supervisors really motivated me. I was so lucky to have good mentors and supervisors and professors that really challenged me to like think critically and to apply my own like twist on it. Kind of like none of your teachers are the same. None of us are the same either. Supervisors are all different. So I was really encouraged by kind of the freedom to make the science of behavior work for me and how I could apply my strengths to it too. We all do it a little different. And I liked that I had the freedom for that. And learning that I did have that freedom. My professors would call it like your toolbox. So you would learn all these skills and you keep it in your toolbox, some things you never use again, and some things you bring out all the time, which I like that analogy. I like learning. And sometimes I've learned something from another supervisor that I'm like, I don't like that. I'm not going to do it. And then a few months or years later, I'm like, oh, they did mention that. Let's try it now, which is really helpful. It's that community really motivates me.
Yeah, I really love that analogy of the toolbox. I mean, I think a lot of modern education, there's this negative connotation because we're learning stuff that we're never going to use and stuff like that. And I, to an extent, I think that there's some truth in that. But I also think that it does, it is supposed to build up your toolbox of ideas and knowledge so that when you are presented with a situation that maybe you weren't expecting, you have a toolbox of resources to rely on to, fix that situation.
Yeah.
You also mentioned, an early internship before you got your master's.
Oh.
How did you get into that internship, and how did that affect your perception of this field?
So that's kind of a funny story. So in my undergrad, like I mentioned, I had a master, I had a psychology major. There's a lot of M words on what I'm saying. I had a psychology major, and part of that major, I had to do an internship. Now, I wanted to work with domestic abuse victims, but I procrastinated and I did not get that internship because it was full. The only internship left, the one that I got, was an ABA clinic, which I didn't know it existed. So it kind of fell into my lap. And then that's how I found this field. And I just found that I loved it. Like I mentioned, when I first started my internship, I was just kind of doing what I was told, but I began to become more interested in why I was doing what I was doing. So I started asking more questions about those principles of behavior, like what is punishment? Why am I ignoring him when he's screaming? Why wouldn't I like yell at him? Like why wouldn't we put him in timeout? And getting a lot of those answers, it was just so fascinating to really think about why we do what we do and how manipulated is a bad word, but like how the environment can be manipulated and those consequences can be manipulated to make change.
Well, and manipulate does kind of have a negative connotation, like what you're saying, but not all of the environment manipulation can be bad. I mean, you can sometimes trick yourself into, doing something that you may not have wanted to do in the first place. I mean, there's lots of ways for you to, trick your brain into doing something that's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have a tool we call antecedent manipulation. So, and manipulation always has a bad connotation, but it's as simple as like looking at your classroom right now. Say these are like young kids, if all your seats were full, and one of them liked to run away. Well, I wouldn't sit them in that back chair with the yellow pillow because it's right by the door. I would manipulate that and make them sit in this front corner because there's many more obstacles in the way. So like that's a manipulation. I'm not manipulating a human, but I'm manipulating the environment to set them up for more success. I'm not going to put them where they're going to just peace out.
Right. That's a good point. And I appreciate you making that clear to us in that way. That was, yeah, it's very true. Manipulating the environment. I also want to ask you a little bit about your field, and that there is a heavy focus on autism and helping those children and people cope and help their behavior, and enhance their behavior. In the field itself, you mentioned that Quest was your favorite place, but the other clinics that you've worked at, what have been some of the struggles, I guess, in the field? Like you mentioned, it's so new. What does that newness mean for some of these clinics that are just starting?
So some of that, like I mentioned a little bit, on the mainland, not Hawaii, we're not allowed in schools. We're not really welcome. We also, our funding source is medical insurance. So we do kind of have to fight for our science. There are some insurances that they're open to it, they understand it, they accept it. But other ones we really have to fight with and argue and kind of prove that our science works, to get the funding that we need to provide the services we do. And some of the clinics, I think the biggest challenge is that they start to run as businesses. They are businesses. The owners want to make money, but it does kind of come to that detriment where instead of providing good service, we just provide service. There's also, even just within the companies that I've worked for, thinking back, they're so different. Like in Hawaii, my first company I worked with didn't have a home base. We didn't have a clinic at all. We only worked in home and in school. And even that in of itself was a challenge, to not have like an office to go to get help. It kind of made things feel very spread out. I didn't know a lot of my coworkers. You feel a little bit isolated. Whereas now, working in a clinic, though I still go in home and in school, I kind of have that home base. So I know people. I don't just know the people I'm supervising. I know other supervisors that I can go to for help. I can see my boss. I can check in with like our administration. It makes a big difference.
Is your job really collaborative? I mean, you mentioned you're working with like a caseload of clients, but is there a lot of collaboration encouraged among your colleagues?
That is a good question, and it does speak to kind of the different cultures within each clinic. In Hawaii, that first clinic, I feel like it was not encouraged. Not that it wasn't encouraged, it was just difficult. It's hard to reach out for help when you've never met someone in real life. At least for me, I think that's a challenge. It's a little awkward. But when I see another supervisor every day, it's a lot easier to be like, hey, I have this kid that's doing this. Do you have any suggestions? Because you've already kind of established that rapport. So it really does depend on the clinic. The clinic I work at now is kind of, it's hit or miss. It depends on the clinic and it depends on the supervisor. I feel like some of us are just lone wolves. We don't want help. We don't want you to like I'm here if you need me, but I kind of want to do my own thing. And then others that kind of way too far on the other extreme, where they want to be involved in everyone's caseload, which also isn't helpful. And so I think a lot of that, as you guys go on and become your own like fully functioning adults, kind of figuring out the way you like to work and the kind of people you work well with. I like to collaborate, but I will say that there's 20 supervisors at my office. I probably have like a handful that I would consistently go to, and the rest I probably wouldn't seek out for collaboration.
It's interesting. Can you speak a little bit about the because I know that some students are, you know, when they're looking at a future career, money is a big reason to go into a certain field. So if you could talk about kind of your, you know, without, if you don't want to go into too much detail, you know, talk about your field's salary, but then if you happen to know about other of the fields that you mentioned, the OBM,
Yes,
I think we have a student in here who's interested in potentially business training or business education. If you know kind of what those other fields look like as far as salary and benefits.
So my specific field, the pay is really decent. It's really good for a BCBA. I think a lot of that is because it's funded by medical insurance, and insurance pays out a lot. So my independent salary right now is $64,000. That varies based on where I've lived. I made a lot more in Hawaii. Colorado was comparable. That's a lot of that living wage, cost of living sort of thing. But it's a good salary. All the clinics I've worked at, they're pretty competitive. So I would say that as far as finances, it's a good field for that. For OBM, I honestly I'm not sure about the salary. I believe it's comparable. There's two men from my master's who I know open their own OBM program, their own company, and I don't know what they make as owners, but when I talked to them when they first started it, they were paying their employees similar to what I'm making. OBM is fascinating, and it's under the realm of ABA. So if you like went one way, they kind of go together. It's a little subsect in that business management is really good. They actually even may make more because businesses are willing to pay out. We're funded by insurance. They would be funded by the specific business. And big companies look for that OBM, like Google, Amazon, Disney. They're the ones who are reaching out and doing these things, and they're willing to spend a lot to contract.
Talking about contract work, you know, I don't know how many students are familiar with how contract work works. You know, as a teacher, I get a salary and I get benefits, and my taxes are taken out of my paycheck, and it's very seamless. You know, the Polk County Schools does do a lot of that, you know, stuff that I don't have to do because I'm not a contractor. Can you speak a little bit about the difference between being a contractor and not being a contractor, being an employee?
Yes. So the position I'm in right now is actually my first contract position. I've always been an employee before, whether it was full-time or part-time. But being a contractor, there's some pros. I do get a little bit of a higher salary than employees at my company. However, I don't have medical benefits. I have to pay for those on the side on my own. And I have to keep track of my own taxes. So when I get my paycheck, no taxes are taken out of it, which sounds really great. Like I'm getting more money right now, but I have to save money to pay my taxes when tax season comes around. It's a lot more thought that kind of goes into it. Some of the other like benefits or flip side. So a benefit that I found is it's easier for me to say no. When I've been a salaried employee, it's kind of like you're working all the time. Whereas as a contractor, I don't have that. Personally, I'm bad at saying no. I say yes to everything, but I do have more power to like for me to turn down a case. Like, oh, that's too far. I don't want to take that case. I don't want to drive there. However, on the other side, I'm responsible for all my own materials. The company doesn't pay for those. Anything I need for my clients, like reinforcers or manipulatives, I have to pay for. My company does do a good job of our continuing education for my field, and for many fields. I have to continue to learn and train and stay current with the science. My company does provide our continuing education for free, so I get that being a contractor. Um, it's a lot to manage as a contractor, but I do like the benefit of a bigger paycheck. I just need to get an accountant.
Well, and I think there's a lot of reasons why someone would want to go be a contractor. Like you mentioned, you kind of set your own schedule.
Mhm.
You work when you want to work. You say yes to what you want to say yes to. There's a lot of freedom in being a contractor, more so than, you know, being an employee. But, you know, if, you know, you said you have employees that kind of just, you know, they take what you what you say, they take your curriculum and they just do the job. You know, why do you think some of those people stay in that as an employee role instead of going and getting their master's or their doctorate to, you know, get a higher degree? Why would they kind of stay as a
So
therapist?
our therapists, they all have a credential. It's a registered behavior technician. And I feel like it's a good, like, kind of go-to first job for people interested in education, early intervention, therapy. It's kind of a good, like, starter position. You get to learn how to work with kids, and you get some of that experience under your belt. But I believe a lot of them don't stay with it, or they just continue because they're not interested in the science itself. I find there's a lot of turnover in that. I mean, there's a lot of turnover everywhere, but in that role specifically, because a lot of them are doing it just to get experience, just to get a job. And it pays pretty well. Like, even as that therapist, it's a good paying job. So, I mean, even for any of you guys, if it's not your dream ABA, but you want to start working with kids, everyone everywhere is always looking for RBTs. Just going to throw that out there. Um, but I think the ones that do stay are the ones that are interested in the science. They want to know the why. Um, and they want to move on. They want to, part of my motivation was knowing the why. And it was also, I didn't want to be in the trenches anymore. I didn't want to be the one giving the one-on-one. I wanted to be the one writing the programs and designing the curriculum. So I think the ones that have the drive for that and the passion for behavior analysis are the ones that continue. The ones that are just like, oh, this is cool. I get to play with kids and do what I'm told, which there's nothing wrong with. It's a great job. It pays well, and there's not as much responsibility as there is when you move on.
Yeah, that's very true. Okay, so as a kind of a last question, COVID-19 obviously has changed everybody's lives. What are some of the things that have changed for you in your career and working with these kids due to COVID-19?
All the things. So when COVID-19 started, I was still living in Hawaii, but everything kind of shut down in Hawaii, including my company, which resulted in me not having a job. And Hawaii is very expensive, so we could not afford to stay there, which is why I'm back here in Lakeland. But for that was my career path, the change. But for the field itself, it's been really challenging because I work with kids on the autism spectrum. A classic sign of autism is not being able to read or understand social cues, especially like nonverbal cues. So to have a mask covering most of someone's face, it makes it even more difficult that now you can only see my eyes. Of course, you can't read my body language because you can't see my whole expression. And then I have the kids that I'm teaching how to speak. I do a lot of echoics and working on imitating sounds, but when they can't see my mouth or how it moves, like to say the letter M, it makes it really challenging. If you can't see it, how are you going to imitate it? And then I also have the side of some of my kids are just terrified of masks. They're terrified of seeing people in masks. They don't want to wear the mask. A lot of them are very sensitive to their clothing. So if you think I have these kids that can't even tolerate like specific t-shirts because they don't want the seams or the tags, and then imagine putting a piece of cloth over their face, it's a lot. So it's been kind of interesting. I've designed programs now to tolerate wearing a mask to teach them how to wear one.
Yeah.
It's been hard. And of course, there's the cancellations. People get sick, and instead of just being like, oh, I have a cold, I'll be back tomorrow, it's, well, I need to get tested. I don't want to risk anything. I'm going to be out for 2 weeks, which I understand and appreciate, but it does hurt the consistency that we need.
Very true. Yeah. And it's so interesting. You mentioned the facial cues and the social cues because, you know, even doing some of that stuff on a Zoom call, on a virtual call, sometimes there's a blockade with that too. You know, if somebody's taking up all the time talking, you know, in a meeting, you know, you don't have the people sitting around the table, you know, snoozing or rolling your eyes or yawning, you know,
their watch.
or checking their watch, right? Like they're alone in their house. I read this or I heard this somewhere recently. And so it's, you know, even in a virtual call, even when you're able to see their face, sometimes it's not always the best as it could be in a face-to-face session. So
That's
have you
interesting.
done any
True.
sessions through Zoom or through virtual calls with your clients?
So I do reserve them for my clients that are less impacted by their diagnosis and that don't need like the hands-on. But I have two clients that are currently enrolled in virtual school, but they need some help with attending. It's a lot harder because even with the students, you're in your own house, you have your own freedom. There's not a teacher right in front of you that can like walk over to your desk. So my boss set up a software where I can queue my student, I can queue my client and talk to them without the rest of the class seeing or hearing me. So I can be there virtually and work with them throughout class without calling attention to them. I don't want to be in their Zoom call and be like, hey, you need to pay attention, because that would be detrimental and embarrassing. So it's been really neat to kind of learn. I do have some other supervisors that they just do sessions over Zoom. I find it really hard. I think a lot of my clients are more heavily impacted, so we're much more hands-on. I think I just like being hands-on. It's kind of hard for me to sit back and when I can't like make them do the thing that I want them to do.
Okay, I want to open up to other students. You guys have been, putting your questions in the chat. Do you guys have any other questions you'd like to throw over to Mrs. Crosby?
Yeah, your questions are great.
Yeah, guys, you're doing a great job.
I have none. I asked all my questions.
Okay.
Thanks, Israel.
Thanks, Israel.
You answered all of them, so.
Oh, good. Thank you. Please tell me
Awesome.
if I didn't answer.
Okay, well, I want to give everybody time if they're typing. Okay, go ahead, Matthew.
Hi, Ms. Crosby. I have a quick question for you. In your opinion, is Quest a good long-term job?
I love Quest. So I will say that the only complaint I have about Quest is that they are a nonprofit company. So the salaries, you're not going to see the salaries that I was quoting because they're nonprofit.
Okay.
However, they really take care of their employees. All of my supervisors that I had then, going on 6 years now, are still there, and they've been there for 10, 15 years, which to me says a lot about a company. I will say that thinking about this field in particular, you'll have this challenge anywhere, but I think you'll have it more at Quest, is that turnover in therapists, because it's a learning company. We get those students and then we kind of turn them out into the real world. So as a supervisor, you'll see a lot of turnovers, but the company itself is incredible. But I will put that caveat of the salary, which is why I didn't stay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Amareth asks, how long did it take for you to get where you are now? For example, how many years in school?
So my master's was 2 years. It was a 2-year program. I started, like I said, I started in my undergrad. I think in my junior year, I started my internship, and then I took off a year between my undergrad and starting my master's. So my master's was 2 years. The way FIT sets up their ABA masters is they do an intensive practicum. So I had to get my supervised fieldwork. I had to get 750 hours. That I was able to do and complete by the time I graduated. So I graduated in May and I sat for my exam in May. People who they can do independent field work, which basically means that they seek it themselves. It's not provided by their school. It requires 1,500 hours, so twice as much. Those students, they will graduate and then it still takes about a year for them to accrue all their hours. So they're sitting for their exam a year after graduation. So for me personally, if you decide to pursue this, I highly recommend finding a program like FIT that does that intensive practicum. Because it's intensive, I think you get really good supervision and you're done a lot quicker. I find a lot of people who sit for the board exam, they end up failing the first time because they're so far out of school and they've been working in the field that they've kind of lost that technical side. I feel like I had a huge benefit from sitting for my exam the same month I graduated.
Really quick, just to go back up to Amareth's question. So from you did 4 years at Florida Southern.
Yeah,
right?
I had 4 years of Florida Southern and then 2 years of my master's.
And then how long do you anticipate your PhD taking?
So they quote 3 years. It's a 3-year program. There's a big caveat that it depends how long it takes you to do your dissertation. So I could essentially be working on my dissertation for 15 years if I didn't get it together.
Is that heard of? Is that heard of?
I think most people who get that far, they stop. You can graduate with your PhD, but you're not a doctor. You'll sometimes see that at the end of people's names, their title, it'll say ABD, which is all but dissertation. So they
Oh,
finished all their coursework, but they never defended their dissertation.
wow.
Yeah. But it should be 3 years. I'm about a year and a half in. I did have to drop a class with my move, so maybe closer to 3.5 years. But according to my professors, there's no reason it should take more than 3 years.
Okay, Ashley asks, what other profession would you at least consider to pursue other than the one you have? And would it be under the same general field, or where would you work with students? Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So when I was in high school, I really wanted to be a marine biologist, and I still kind of want to be a marine biologist, but I'm not good at math, and that's a lot of math. The other profession I think I would consider is, because I don't know if I've mentioned it, but my dissertation currently, my plan is to work on criminal justice and the application of behavior analysis to criminal justice. So in the back of my head, I've kind of thought about becoming a lawyer so I could apply it. So in that respect, I wouldn't be working with students at all. So I think if I changed my career away from students, I'd probably become a lawyer, but that's a lot of school.
Do you think there's an opportunity for, you're talking about doing this in applied behavioral analysis is the word I'm looking for. Thank you.
Too many words. You're welcome.
You mentioned it going into criminal justice. Is there an opportunity for that to be a part of teen and child criminal? We have the juvenile criminal system. Do you think that that's a place where this could kind of go into as well?
I think so, for sure. Like in ABA and really with education in general, that early intervention is the key. Early intervention technically refers to like very young kids, like 2-3 years old. But I think in the juvenile justice system, when you think about attrition, so when people get released from jail as adults and then they end up back in jail, I think to intervene earlier, that early intervention in the juvenile court, you could make a much bigger change, lasting change on behavior than if you waited till they were adults. Which you just gave me like so many more research ideas.
I'm so glad.
Like,
and honestly, having this conversation with you brings up so many different ideas that I want to talk to you about later. So
yeah.
I'll have to text you to see if you're available this weekend to chat, because just having this conversation with you has opened up some of my my thinking as well.
Yes, I'm taking notes.
Yeah, good. Okay, so my last kind of thing I want us to leave on is what advice, like I said, we've got a mixture of students here. We got some freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. We have a whole range of students in this class. What would be your advice to give them as they're looking at their future and maybe their future career as well?
So I think as far as looking for a career, it's important to find something that you're passionate about. It's hard to be an adult. It's hard to work. And there's that quote that I'm sure you all have heard where it's, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. I'm going to tell you that's not true. So it's not real life. I love what I do. I hope that comes across, but there's some days that I don't want to do it anymore. I want to go work at Dunkin' Donuts. I want to go make cupcakes. I want to sit at home and test beds. Like, just want to nap for a living. But my passion for my field is strong enough that when those days are over, I still love my field and I still love what I do. I think this is something I'm still working on. So hopefully you guys can get it together before you're pushing 30. It's saying no and respecting your time. I'm a people pleaser. Anything my boss asks, I'm like, oh, yep, I got it. I can take on all the clients. I can do all the things. And that's what leads to burnout, which I think leads to that like, oh, now I hate my job. And I think it's so sad for someone to have such passion and talent for something to then hate it. I see it happen with my therapists. I try to help. So learn how to say no. Also, in working toward higher education or even just towards a career, there's a quote that I really love. Obviously, I just really love quotes, so I'm just gonna throw them all at you. That's don't give up what you want most for what you want right now. Which to me means that there are going to be some sacrifices. I'm currently working on my PhD, like I said, and it's a lot of work. I don't want to come home after a long day of work and study. I want to play video games. I want to go to bed. I want to watch TV, but I have to sacrifice those kind of immediate desires for what I ultimately want, which is to get my PhD in less than 3 years. So just to kind of remember that. So in a nutshell, learn how to say no, respect your own boundaries and time, figure out what you're passionate about, and be willing to sacrifice for it.
That's great. That's honestly so great. Thank you so much, Mrs. Crosby. Just to make sure, is there any other questions you guys have for Ms. Crosby before we let her go enjoy the rest of her afternoon?
You guys have such good questions. I love your classes.
I know, they're great. They're great. This is probably, don't tell any of my other classes, but this is my favorite.
You're the favorite.
I see them every day, so yeah.
Thank you for having me. And I will say, this is up to you, Ms. Hanley, but if anyone wants to know more about ABA specifically, you're welcome to give them my email address. I'm happy to.
Are you able to type that in the chat?
Yeah, 100%.
Go ahead. And anyone who is watching this recording after, I'll make sure to link that in the what I put on Schoology. Thank you so much, Ms. Crosby. And of course, anytime, you're welcome back anytime.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
That's me.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm gonna go ahead and stop this recording.